watching. My straw reaches across the room and starts to drink your milkshake. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up!
These aren't even anti-heroes, they're villains. So why do we treat them like icons? Part 1. Definition. After exploring how film fans keep misreading satirical warning signs, turning characters like Tyler Durden and Jordan Belfort into role models, I started thinking about the thin line between the anti-hero and the villain. At what point does moral gray turn into something darker? And why do so many people feel seen when they stare into the abyss? This is even a mistake I made in my previous video where I used GIFs and edits of characters like Tupac's character in Juice, though he is a straight up villain in the story of the film. So even your handsome, deep-voiced guide can fall victim to confusion or weaponized ignorance for entertainment. That's kind of what that whole video was about, actually. But we should define the terms anti-hero and villain to fully clear up any confusion on the difference between them in their roles in fiction. An anti-hero is a protagonist who lacks traditional heroic qualities and often operates in morally ambiguous territory. They'll bend rules, cross lines, and follow a personal code that doesn't always align with ours. But crucially, it never strays so far from social norms that we reject them outright. Their flaws make them compelling, not repulsive. Think of characters like Deadpool, Rorschach, Omar from The Wire, or Jax from Sons of Anarchy. People who do questionable things, but within a moral framework we the audience can understand, if not fully endorse. Most anti-heroes over the course of the film, book, or TV series normally land on either the hero or villain side by the end of the story. A villain is a little more complicated, because the label often depends on whose perspective the story follows. Traditionally, a villain is defined as a character whose motives and actions directly oppose the protagonist, becoming the source of conflict and tension within the narrative. What separates a villain from a simple antagonist is intent. Antagonists create obstacles, but villains pursue harm, chaos, or domination with deliberate malice. Their goals aren't just misaligned with the protagonist, they're actively destructive. Examples are Joffrey from Game of Thrones, Hannibal, Palpatine, and Negan from The Walking Dead before the redemption bullshit. Maybe that's a topic for another day. The distinction between these two terms becomes crucial when filmmakers craft stories that intentionally blur the already thin line between moral ambiguity and outright villainy. Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver and Lou Bloom from Nightcrawler are not anti-heroes, yet they're framed in ways that make them appear as if they could be. Their loneliness invites empathy, even as their actions demand caution. That tension between who they truly are and how we're encouraged to see them is where the real conversation begins. Lou Bloom works in a field where filming crime scenes for local news becomes a pathway to success, and he treats every tragedy as a business opportunity. Travis Bickle is, well, a taxi driver. If these two ever met, neither would recognize the similarities in their dispositions, but the overlap is undeniable. Both men are shaped by loneliness, and both let that loneliness fester into something dangerous. Their jobs don't define them, their isolation does, and it twists them in ways they can't see, but we can. Part 2, ISO. Isolation is a key detail for all the characters I'll discuss. Part of why it resonates is because most of us have felt lonely at some point in our lives, but for men in particular, isolation has been mythologized. The lone wolf, the drifter, the ranger who stands apart from society. American culture has romanticized this template for decades. The attractive white male lead who's misunderstood, self-exiled, or too principled to fit in. Where Nightcrawler and Taxi Driver pivot is by revealing early on that these men aren't victims of isolation, but architects of not only their own demise, but sadly the people around them that inhabit their lives. Lou Bloom assaults a man within the first 3 minutes of the film and steals his watch, a quiet signal that his ambition is predatory from the start. But what's more revealing is how the camera behaves. Where Lou sees violence as opportunity, the film cuts away before we ever see him truly get his hands dirty. It's as if the film itself is complicit in the crime. choosing to look away in the same moments Lou would, mirroring his belief that the brutality isn't the story is what you make it. But in Taxi Driver, Paul Schrader and Martin Scorsese use Travis Bickle's narration the way Alan Moore uses Rorschach's journal in Watchmen. They trap us inside a disturbed mind and make us responsible for noticing the warning signs along the way. Travis isn't just lonely, he's actively shaping a worldview that justifies what he has to become. The film lets us ride shotgun in that transformation, whether we're comfortable with it or not. And while Travis has more redeeming qualities than Lou, his isolation, his unprocessed trauma from the war he was in, his prejudices, especially toward minorities, collide with the time period, the 70s, where mental health wasn't even part of the conversation. It creates an uphill battle he was never equipped to win, and the tragedy is that he doesn't even realize he's fighting it. As both characters try to rise, the world pushes back against their true nature. Lou believes his charm and corporate-sounding confidence will land him a job, and Travis asks out Betsy despite his nerves and social anxiety. But the moment each of them gets a small win, it crumbles in their hands, and the responses reveal their individual hypocrisies. Lou, suffocated by the pressures of modern capitalism, becomes an opportunistic capitalist himself. He embraces the very system that rejected him, using moral taboo as a tool to get ahead. Being first at a crime scene becomes his version of success, and violence becomes just another business strategy. Travis, after being rejected by Betsy for taking her to a porno theater, which is insane, doesn't just retreat into darkness, he studies it. He absorbs the worst parts of the world he claims to despise. He tries to assassinate a politician for no reason beyond causing chaos and his internal frustration. He even buys the same gun as the man who was in his cab bragging about wanting to shoot his wife. And the entire subplot with Iris, which had been romanticized by audiences, is built upon projection. Travis wants this child to see him as a hero, but he also enjoys the time he spends with her because it gives him a sense of purpose he can't find anywhere else. Deep down, Travis knows the connection is one-sided, and he knows he would never have sought her out if Betsy stayed in his life, and never would have had access to her if she weren't a child forced into prostitution. That imbalance lets him play the role he's always fantasized about. The lone man who swoops in to save the girl who can't see the danger he believes he's rescuing them from. This is where the two men diverge. Lou weaponizes violence for personal gain, turning on Rick, the one person who helped him along his journey, manipulating him into getting shot, and filming his death for profit. While Travis uses violence as escape, a way to feel powerful in a life where he feels invisible. That's why the final shootout in Taxi Driver is so stark. No music, no triumph, no catharsis. It's messy, quiet, and strangely forgettable because there's no purpose behind his actions. Travis would disagree, but the film doesn't. In the end, both of our protagonists win. Lou manipulates, blackmails, assaults, and bends reality to his will using deceit, and the world rewards him with his own video production company, a team he can lead even deeper into the darkness he created. Travis's ending is more ambiguous, but he's still remembered as a hero in New York, a man who cleaned the filth off the streets, even though he may have been the catalyst for Iris's most traumatic experience in her life. Both worlds look at these men and see either lone heroes or examples of the American capitalist myth, men who pulled themselves up from nothing. And if their stories end in success, recognition, and praise, then how bad could they possibly be? Part 3, Nature and Nurture. The other two success stories I want to look at are the 2019 Joker and HBO's The Penguin. We as a species will probably argue about nature versus nurture forever, and I don't have an answer to that chicken or the egg ass question, but I can say this comfortably. Whatever fictional LA and New York Lou and Travis crawled out of doesn't come close to the hellscape that birthed the Cape Crusader. Arthur Fleck and Oswald Cobblepot aren't just characters, they're natives of Gotham City, practically mascots for what you can become in a place designed to destroy you from within. Both the film and the limited series wear their influences proudly. Joker is intrinsically tied to Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, while The Penguin pulls from The Sopranos and a long lineage of other mob stories. But the twist is perspective. Both stories center on men who come from nothing, ostracized by their society, but where one is drowning in his own misfortune to a point where he embraces it, the other is driven by a need to succeed no matter what or who gets in the way, for no reason other than the hunger itself. Sound familiar? Both of these characters were born and bred in oppressive environments, isolated with no one but their mothers, and both relationships are strange, unhealthy, and sadly defining. That creates an interesting thread between all four characters in this video. At their core, they all just want to be loved, or at least comforted. For Lou and Oz, even if that affection is manufactured or forced, they'd accept it without question. They don't care how their partner feels, they just want the illusion of connection. And for Arthur and Travis, even if the relationship isn't real, they'd rather live inside a fantasy than deal with the compromises and vulnerability required to build something equal with another person. What makes villains like the Joker and the Penguin so compelling in these portrayals and even in the comics is that they genuinely see themselves as the hero of their own story. When people enter their lives, even to help them, they dismiss them or destroy them out of fear of losing their individuality or the fragile identity they've built. They remind me of animals at their most rabid, scared, cornered, and dangerous because they don't know what to do with their fear. So even when someone reaches out a hand, they bite that bitch. I think Gotham made these individuals as crazy as they are. One of the best case scenarios in the city is a billionaire who decided dressing up as a bat was a reasonable use of his time and resources. But crazy doesn't automatically mean evil, it just means misguided. What's compelling about both versions of Joker and Penguin is that the creators give us enough time with them, enough lived experience, to believe they could make better choices, even though thematically, their spiral is inevitable. Characters like Vic and Francis in The Penguin and Gary and Joker remind us that there is a loving human core inside these monsters. But when Arthur and Oz are forced to choose between facing the vulnerability that comes with real connection or clinging to the fragile identities they've built, they choose themselves every single time. Not out of malice, out of fear. Fear that if they relinquish control, if they try to exist in the world on its own terms, they won't be enough. Arthur Fleck is bullied as an adult for things he can't control, like his neurological laugh. Oz is mocked for things he can't control, like his limp and his face. But when they finally gain control on a micro or macro scale, they choose vengeance, not peace. They seek more power and more respect, even after they've already earned it. Oz didn't need to kill Vic, he wanted to. Not because Vic would snitch, and not because he hated him. If he felt anything towards Vic, it was the opposite. He kills Vic because he knew too much about who Oz really was. Oz didn't want to be known by anyone except his mother, which is why he kills his brothers, and he proves it by locking her away where no one can find her, keeping her for himself while knowing she hates him. And Arthur, maybe you can justify the subway killings as self-defense. Maybe you can even justify Randall's death. He did try to frame Arthur with a gun in a children's hospital room. But Murray? Arthur didn't kill Murray for a message or for chaos or for revolution, even though many people thought he did. He killed him because the moment wasn't like the fantasy he'd rehearsed in his head. He was hurt, tired of being laughed at, and in the end he turned the gun on a man he admired simply because he wasn't what Arthur hoped he would be. And if he did that to an idol, why wouldn't he do that to the mom he loves, or the dad he wished he had, or the woman he romanticizes in his head? What Arthur and Oz ultimately show is that Gotham doesn't create villains through destiny, it creates them through pressure. Both men spend their entire lives being told they don't matter. And the moment they finally seize control, they cling to it with a desperation that turns violent and perpetuate the same vitriol they felt when they were powerless. Their worst acts aren't about ideology or chaos or even revenge. They're about protecting the fragile sense of self they've built in a world that never gave them one in the first place. And that's why their victories feel so hollow. Arthur becomes a symbol he never intended to be, and Oz becomes a king of a kingdom that will never love him back. Their stories aren't triumphs, but about men who thought the only way to be seen is to become something monstrous. Which gets us to the part nobody likes unpacking, the real world cost of everything we've just talked about. Part 4, sacrifice. In the end, Lou, Travis, Arthur, and Oz aren't cautionary tales about violence. They're cautionary tales about loneliness, identity, and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. All four of them get what they want, both inside their narratives and outside of them. They're immortalized in the careers of their actors who played them, and as an audience, we celebrate that. But it's worth asking, what is the price of iconography? If someone can do something horrific and be remembered for it, and if that memory becomes a kind of success, what does that teach us about the systems we live in? Just like in the previous video, there's too much evidence that this thematic equation, the lonely man who becomes unforgettable through destruction, has been passed down to people who willed it irresponsibly. Not just fans of the art, but fans turned artists. And if I'm being honest, I don't know if there's a responsible way to portray that. I understand why we're drawn to darkness though. It's comforting to feel nothing, to dissolve into the void, to believe that serving a purpose for yourself frees you from the burden of being a person connected to community. But look at how these characters really end, just as unknown, unseen as they were before you press play. So we all have to ask ourselves, what's actually worth it? Every choice comes with sacrifice and compromise. Do you want people to know you, or to know the version of you that was invented for comfort? We may not control our fates, but we control what we give back to this rotting world. If you want to return the same pain and grief these fictional men did, there's a long line of misguided people waiting for you. But if you want to try, even imperfectly, to make things better, to help simply because you can, despite your fear, I'll try to be right behind you. Because at the end of the day, that's all it is, a choice. One we have to make every single day. And I'm preaching a word I don't read as often as I should. So as we close, thank you for watching, thank you for being here, and thank you for trying your best. Peace.